Welcome, advocates, to another episode of the Leading Equity Podcast, a podcast that focuses on supporting educators with the tools and resources necessary to ensure equity at their schools. Today's special guest is Nawal Qarooni. Without further ado, Nawal, thank you so much for joining us today.
I really appreciate your having me.
Pleasure is mine. I'm excited for today's topic. You are the author of Nourishing Caregiver, Collaborations Elevating Home Experiences and Classroom Practices for Collective Care. And that's right here. Folks, I will leave a link in the show notes. So that's a little bit about who you are, but I'd love for you to share with our audience who you are and what you currently do.
Thank you. I've been a longtime educator in middle schools, as a literacy coach after that, as an instructional leader in both Brooklyn and Chicago public schools. And for the past 10 years or so, my new baby has been family literacy and working on engagement in California and across the country. And so now I live back in the East Coast. I have 4 little kids of my own. I do a bunch of other stuff like adjunct at universities. And I'm super excited about this book because I think that the work is so important and meaningful in shifting the conversation around families and engagement in schools.
All right. Well, I'm excited. We're going to be talking about storytelling. And one of the things that you said before we even hit record that really stuck out to me was that storytelling is the roadmaps to the future. I'm just curious, what did you mean by that?
Well, I think a lot about what we determine or exalt and validate as literacy in classrooms and in our schools. And often it is really the worship of the written word, isn't it? And I think about families of all stripes and all kinds from different backgrounds and different ethnicities, just all kinds of different families. And what's universal is this really incredible storytelling that happens. It happens authentically. Sometimes it needs kind of a springboard and a nudge. But as classroom teachers and as folks who work with young people in schools, that's what we're trying to encourage, oral storytelling. It's a really easy kind of way that we can include families in the work that we're trying to achieve in the literacy classroom.
So, okay, I was a history teacher. I did social studies. And so I loved telling a story. Like, to me, that was the only way I can keep my students' attention, was to be able to tell whatever event, historical figure, hero, heroine, those kind of things. I had to keep them engaged by telling these stories. So when you say that it's the roadmaps to the future, are we saying like I need to know my past, or I need to share with my classmates, or maybe share with my teacher, or what? Like I want to learn a little bit more as far as kind of what your thoughts are on why storytelling is so important.
I mean, honestly, I don't believe we can move forward if we don't really understand where we came from and who we are. And often I can't even tell where my thoughts begin and my mom's memories kind of end because of how much she has told me. I think about that a lot, that our parents or our caregivers and the people who shaped us, the collective being very kind of wide ranging in who our family is, they provide compasses for us to make sense of the world. And they do that for kids. And so one of the ways that we can continue to engage families is by ensuring that those stories are happening. I think about my mom, who comes to Jersey City to take care of my 4 young children when I travel. And she was invited to be a guest reader in one of their classrooms. She wouldn't go because reader really turned her off and really scared her. The minute that I explained to her that she could just tell stories from her past or from Iran or for the same stories that she tells my kids at bedtime, as soon as we called it guest storyteller, her whole kind of behavior shifted around understanding that she could go and just talk. Reader really alienated her. And so sometimes I think we put up these barriers, which we don't even realize. We think that we're engaging and inviting families into the classroom space, but maybe we're inadvertently making folks feel insecure or uncomfortable with that ask.
So do you recommend teachers prompt their students kind of on a journal style, or does it matter what subject that they're teaching? Is it something applicable to a math class versus maybe a PE class versus maybe a ELA class? I mean, does that all look differently in those different content areas?
Yes, of course. It's not relegated to a single curricular area. Storytelling, of course. You said it was for history. I think I think storytelling makes learning stickier. It's the way that we can move forward. But in my book, I try to explain and give ideas for a bunch of different ways that we can not only storytell, but also deeply listen. I think that that's part of storytelling, is being cognizant that we don't need to rush to solve, allowing kids to kind of meander. I give examples for story building. So starting a story, adding on to it. I give examples for oral recording so that can be part of the revision process, because often multilingual and multi-ethnic kids, when they are hearing back how they sounded in their writing, they're able to catch their own mistakes and or catch how they wanted it to sound. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that it works in every curricular area, but often families don't recognize that. Families don't recognize that that is really rich and important storytelling. And so, there are ideas like photo elicitation, where we can take photos alongside families and have this kind of shared literacy experience where we ask a bunch of questions. Who's outside the frame? Who wasn't in the frame? Who's taking the photo? What was the context of this photo? How old was I at this time? Were you alive? Were you not? Kind of generating those questions so that families have those to then discuss with their kids. I talk about all kinds of oral history projects when it comes to kind of who's in your collective, who are the people who shape you, and then what are the conversations that you could have with those folks that then we can record and keep memories around. And I took that into curricular work so that it doesn't feel kind of isolated.
Okay, so you look at getting families involved with their. Okay, I mean, to me, that's a great way to partner with the schools, between the families, and also at the school and the teachers and things like that. I like the idea of the photo. I think you said solicitation project. Is that what, did I say it correctly? Solicitation? It was elicitation or solicitation?
Elicitation.
Okay.
Elicitation. It's the idea that a photo can
Uh,
elicit a ton of conversation.
got you.
That a single photo can elicit a ton of conversation. So I can give you an example.
Yeah.
And during the pandemic, my closest aunt on my mother's side died very quickly of colon cancer. And when she was dying, I flew to go see her in Virginia. And because my parents lived, their stuff was all destroyed in the Iran-Iraq war in the 80s. I don't have any photos of my family when they were young. And so my aunt happened to have just a few. I was able to, as before she passed away, have a conversation with her around these single photographs. And so we spent hours poring over just a handful of photographs. And so I was asking things down to the detail, it's almost closely looking at a visual, right? Over and over and over again, closely reading a visual and asking every question under the sun. Whose shadow is this? Who had a camera? What time of day was this? Where, right? Everything that you can possibly generate, and how much I then was able to learn as a result, and how those stories would not have existed. I would not have known those. They would not have been passed down to me had I not had that opportunity. And so that's the kind of idea. I literally do it in family lab sites where I invite families to bring old family photographs or community photos, being cognizant that families might not have those artifacts, into the school building. I model it with the kids in front of them. And then they go off with their family members and they talk wildly. Those often then can springboard into writing, because then what they've done is brainstorm vignettes, small moments, and personal narrative ideas. What then happens? Families now know that that's how brainstorming works. And that's what we're trying to elicit in a literacy classroom. What's also happening is identity work. They're learning about themselves. They're learning about their pasts.
That's good. Learn about their past. And then I could see how having that knowledge as an educator, if I want to be culturally responsive, I mean, to me, that's just almost like the blueprint, like you said, the roadmap to what we can do next. Okay, I know about this family. Maybe I had assumptions already because of their last name. Maybe I already had assumptions because of whatever small limited information I had. But now you have told me this is where my family comes from. This is how we thrive. This is what we celebrate at home. These are some of our customs. Here's some of our practices. So how does a teacher take this knowledge that they've learned from, such as your photo elicitations, how do they take that information and utilize that as teachers?
I mean, I think neuroscience teaches us, this is Zaretta Hammond's work, culturally responsive teaching in the brain, that the brain is more primed to learn when kids feel comfortable with us. And that often happens, the amygdala, the front of the brain literally feels more comfortable and is less on alert when stories are being told and when they then feel comfortable with us. So if not anything, it's like a hospitality mode for like setting the nourishing table for how you're going to teach your children in front of you. And we can't separate knowing the children from knowing their families. Knowing the children and knowing their families to me is like one and the same. And so you better understand who's in front of you when these invitations are happening, when these conversations are happening in your midst, when they can get captured and part of kind of like the memory keeping in your classroom. And better yet, like when it's woven into your whole entire year, as opposed to a one-off literacy night that doesn't actually move the dial in understanding families and understanding family engagement differently. What usually happens in these moments also is the teacher becomes really human for the families because the teacher is modeling it with their own example.
That was gonna be my question. Do the teachers do it too? Okay.
Yeah. So the teachers are kind of modeling it like in a fishbowl. I mean, think of it exactly as like a little lesson, and the families are sitting on the rug, like literally with their kids. And we do it at different times a day so as not to alienate families who have different schedules and to just like make sure that you're capturing as many families as possible. And it's kind of low stakes and there's no right or wrong. And it's really joyful to just like share in this literacy experience with your kids. And if that's kind of part of the fabric of the way that you're operating, you have more teachers in the classroom because then families are understanding the languages that we're trying to speak. So when I do this, or example, I just did this recently in California, and I did do an example of one of my photographs from my grandparents that I got from my aunt's house. And in that photograph, my grandparents are like taking apart a carcass, like an animal carcass. And I didn't know anything about the ritual around when families would come from the United States to Iran. They would like slaughter an animal and serve it to the community to make sure that the family who was traveling was protected. It's like giving back to the community in order to protect your family, warding off the evil eye. And so I learned all of that and that kind of like cultural ritual, but also that like my grandfather did that and that they labored to take apart the meat so that they could serve the people in the community before we would arrive or their children would arrive from the United States back to visit. So when you do that, families then also feel incredibly connected to you because you've now revealed more of yourself. And as a result, they're more apt to reveal of themselves. It creates and like primes the entire kind of kitchen table, if you will, becomes just warm and nourishing. It's like you want to break bread with folks, you know?
I could see like so many benefits to this, like relationship building. One of the things I always find helpful is like at my kids' school when they were younger, the teachers before COVID, the teachers would do the home visits. That summer they would reach out to parents. Hey, I'm the teacher for your child this year. I want to come by and visit your home.
Yep.
Half hour or whatever. They come
Yep.
by, give a nice presentation, and they always took a picture of the children. And when they showed up to the first day of school, there's their picture up on the wall and something comfortable. Maybe they had their stuffed animal with them, or maybe they were out on a trampoline. I think one year we had the kids take pictures on their trampoline. Like there's always like little things. And like you said, it's so powerful with a child walks into the classroom first day of school. They see pictures of them that the teachers can't. They've already met their teacher. They've already had a chance to explain a little bit about who they are, who their family is, and how much of a relationship you can develop from day one, as opposed to you walk in the first day of school, haven't had a chance to touch base or any of those kind of things. I kind of wonder, is this something that we should do in the first of the year? Is there like a check-in midway through the year that we can do that's similar to cultural storytelling? Like what are your thoughts there?
Well, I love that. But what I do for sure, is take out your calendar, your school calendar, and make sure that you're peppering them across the entire year. Make sure it's not just a single time, not just cultural storytelling, but then I have all the other invitations. I have, let's draw a map of a special place and let's remember the memories that happened there. And let's talk about all those memories as we're doing that, because that is one of the brainstorming tools again for writing. And so what they've done is engage in the brainstorming process, but then you see kids who never had, a paper so full because they were there brainstorming alongside their family excitedly. You have the power of the shared pen or the shared crayon, where both the family, the caregiver, and the kid is working on a single sheet of paper and co-creating something. There's power in that. You have like sad memories bubbling up and remember when that happened. You have kids learning about their parents. Like, I didn't know that you drew graffiti in Mexico, but like the dad is like real nice with the pen, right?
Yeah.
And she's learning about her dad in that moment. And so Yeah, I have all these, what I call shared family kind of like experience ideas that and believe me, teachers have way better ideas than I do because they know their community, right? And
Mhm.
so they just run with it. And so you have to plan them across the entire year.
Okay, not a one and done. This is
Not
something that we do throughout the year.
That's right. Not a one and done. But it's like what you said about the home visit. It's what we're trying to do is break down barriers and knowing each other and break down barriers and understanding the families we serve. And we don't realize or recognize how many there actually are. Like when I interviewed folks in Chicago, there were people saying, the secretary's mean. I'm uninterested in going to the building. They make us sit in these really small chairs and tables and they talk above us. Like the power dynamic of even where people were standing intimidated folks. You have folks who didn't do school well themselves and don't feel comfortable with formal education, so they feel they can't contribute to their child's literacy learning. These are all things that we're trying to break down in those shared experiences. And so, yeah, body language is super important. I usually make sure that you come with, if you have little siblings, because I always had kids strapped to me and didn't want to not be able to go if I had like little kids. So I'll have kids on my hip while I'm modeling this, because it should be, intergenerational. Sometimes siblings from other grade levels come instead or in lieu of family members, or like abuelas and titis and all kinds of different cousins come instead. In a recent one that I did in Chicago, there was a mother who sat there super silently with her daughter and they filled the page. But then afterwards she said to me, like, did you notice that we didn't speak? She doesn't talk to me. Like sometimes it's the power of sitting there together, but that page was full. She had a ton of ideas. They had created a special place map and it was like of their house in Puerto Rico, right? Like that they had like spent a ton of time with tons of details and all these kind of like little moments and dots that then could be literacy learning for us in the classroom that educators could use. So it's better knowing the families in order to better know the kids and better serve them in culturally responsive ways while we're teaching them.
One of the things that I've heard throughout our conversation is you've mentioned oral presentations, you've mentioned visual presentations. I've heard you even talk about writing pages filled. Is that a cultural responsive practice? So like maybe, for example, some people's homes, they prefer to historically, they tell oral stories. There's certain cultures, certain tribes or whatnot, where they just pass down through oral history versus another might be a visual. Maybe they are used to putting stuff on the walls that you mentioned earlier. So I'm hearing the flexibility, maybe that's not the best way to say it, but there's the approach of families are allowed to present or share what's preferable to them. Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. And that's how we should be in the classroom, just equally nimble, right? Equally nimble and allowing for kids to, I like to say, and what artifact are you compelled to create as a result of this learning? And so like another example is these constellations of care that families create alongside their kids. You can give it in a variety of ways. You can model it. You can give it as an assignment. You could do it as a family literacy night, whatever. But the idea is, who are the people who shape you? Who are the people who would show up on this neighborhood map or this community map or this constellation of care? How do you want to visually represent it? How do you want to represent it, period? Some people create straight up constellations. Some people record it and explain examples. Some people make a garden of the people that made them grow. Some people, like, literally the visuals were endless and the examples were endless. There were kids putting the bodega owner because he's where they go after school before their parent picks them up. And that's who they debrief with all their days, woes and triumphs and travails. And so that guy shows up on there, even though he was not a blood relative, because he's meaningful in shaping that kid's literacy life. And so being really like wide ranging and saying like families can look a lot of different ways. Your artifacts can look a lot of different ways. Your storytelling can look a lot of different ways. There's no one single right way to be, is culturally responsive practice.
Mic drop.
I mean, so.
Well, you're bringing the fire today. That's okay. I have so like, okay, this to me, this takes away from your traditional family tree. Go reach out to grandmother, grandfather, or whoever and find out, who you're and I never like the family tree activities because I feel like it's very limiting to a lot of people, such as your folks of African descent or your folks that are Native American. Like a lot of this thing is not culturally responsive to a lot of folks. So the majority of your group might be all excited to research their family in Europe and their all the different history, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody else is going to feel included. So to me, what I'm hearing is this is way above your traditional. Maybe we should even throw out. Maybe we should throw out your traditional family tree activity.
I have a section in the book talking specifically about that because I believe that we alienate families who have degrees of kinship that are so much richer than potentially your blood relatives alone, and that could bring anxiety for kids who don't have access to that information and or have people in their lives super significant that do not show up on the traditional mother father family tree. You think about your same-sex households, you think about my aunts and uncles who would not have shown up though they shaped me as patriarchs in the family. Think about my kids who put my college roommate Ryan and his boyfriend Ryan on their family collective because they lived in our backyard in Chicago for many years and were part of kind of like the fabric of my children's growth. And so the questions that I like to ask families instead are, where did language live for you? Where did storytelling live for you? Whose voices have you heard? I like to make sure that we show examples of flawed and nuanced adults. And so a springboard for conversation, another one for shared family experiences, is talking about challenges and times where we like potentially made mistakes, didn't know the answers, or struggled through a thing. This is like very hard for families to talk about. But again, I think when we model it, they're more apt to share. And so these kind of low stakes invitations are useful for that, to show like people don't need to be a single way. They don't need to look a certain way. And those constellations of care, the examples are so vast. You show too serious of a model, then it limits their own imagination and innovation and creativity for how they might represent it, is what I've found.
So you show them what the example could look like ahead of time?
I create it in front of them.
Oh, you create it in front of them.
Create it right in front of them so that teachers recognize how easy and quick it is to try these low stakes family literacy sites and lab sites. I don't ever want it to feel like an extra super huge hard endeavor that they've pre-prepped and pre-planned for that then families didn't come and then they got upset about. It should be like planned on a post-it, ready to go. We're going to try it out a couple mornings. Once you do it, you see how simple it is. Often teachers start the next week. They're like, we're doing it. We're going to look at the map of our calendar year, and we're going to pepper these in across the year. As a result, your communication with newsletters, your communication with the Remind app, your communication with pickup report cards becomes softer because you've now engaged with families in this way.
You know, often we focus on the academic side, and I know a lot of schools are shifting. Yeah, because obviously you have standards, benchmarks, and all those kind of things. But a lot of schools are also recognizing, yeah, but these are human beings at the end of the day.
That's right.
Right. And we kind of touched on the importance of, kids feeling comfortable. I'm just thinking from a sense of belonging standpoint, because I do a lot of work in that area. Me telling my story or my culture story, I would assume that creates some sort of belonging where I feel maybe accepted, supported, and included. I just wanted to see if you had some thoughts in that area.
Well, yeah, I mean, I try to, and everything that I do, of course, use models that then kids can see themselves, like windows and mirrors and Dr. Regine Bishop. So like if I'm doing, for example, reading photos alongside kids with families or reading images, we'll move into then reading picture book images alongside families during the independent work time. And those books are so purposefully selected to also make sure that kids can see themselves. It automatically gives a sense of belonging to kids when you even the playing field. It's not you're a higher reader or a lower reader. It's we're all looking at this image together, right? We're all looking at this, and all of us are capable of having a conversation about this piece of text being an image, or, kind of when you expand the definition of literacy to be more wide ranging than just alphabetic words on a page, kids then get a sense of belonging because their confidence is boosted, because then you can heterogeneously group them. They feel more confident with their families there anyway. They then have kind of the conversation springboard that they're able to then explain to their families what they did. So families are not just like taking the final product and saying, does this look nice? That's what the final product should be, as opposed they like know the entire story. I mean, I think that breeds a sense of confidence, and as a result, a sense of belonging. Like you are 100%. Every child has amazing strengths, no matter what, period. Full stop. And so I think part of it is like arming families with the kinds of questions that they can ask, so that it's not just like, where is my child when it comes to comparison with others, but like, What inspires a sense of wonder in my child? What motivates my child to smile in the classroom? So the questions that I've organized are around agency and identity. And yes, of course, a sense of belonging. Like, does my child know that you know these things about them? Because what does that do? That makes the child feel so seen.
Okay, I have a question. My gears are turning, and I'm thinking you're going to have a diverse spread from maybe social economic status. You might have race and gender. There's all these different identities, and so I'm thinking if I'm a teacher and I'm facilitating one of these activities, let's say again the photo elicitation. I just like saying elicitation now. So let's say we're talking about that, and let's say this one affluent family, they go all out with their project, and even their story is just like, oh my gosh, privilege. Then you
Right.
got another family that they do what they can,
Right.
and their story may not be as exciting.
Yeah.
How do we facilitate these type of activities to where there's celebration between each group?
No, absolutely. I mean, in every one of these experiences, there has been some level of discomfort with
Sure.
someone somewhere. It might be a teacher who says, gosh, that made me really sad. They didn't
Yeah.
even have this kind of experience, or she couldn't think of blank. Honestly, I don't do a big kind of like gallery presentation of any kind. It's just for the process and it's just for the moment. It's a lot of teacher moving around with such hand on heart, like excitement, over the top enthusiasm for there's no right and wrong. I'm so excited you're here and sharing of yourselves. It's a lot of that. It's not, let's put it on display and all of us then have a conversation about, right? And so I think that minimizes things. But yeah, you have to kind of be okay with some discomfort given the fact that you're like experiencing people's lives. When they're opening themselves up to you, you're going to have a lot of variation. And also it's like very dependent on like the teaching body versus the student body, or versus the family. Is like I've experienced a lot of kind of funky moments, but nothing that we can't kind of like get around and say, oh, I recognize that. And all families are different.
Okay. Okay. It was on my mind. I was like, man, this is great, but I just can imagine like you got 30 different families or 30 different stories,
Yeah,
and
there was a student in one of my recent lab sites that didn't want to bring out the thing that he had created with his family, just even to put up on the wall. And it was because he had a bunch of different siblings from different backgrounds and races, and he didn't want the kids to then like ask a bunch of questions. And I only got that out of him afterwards when I was like, "Show me your project. It's amazing. Let's put it up there." I think it's up to us to navigate those conversations, and they might be funky. Jennifer Eberhardt, a social scientist, her, who wrote Biased.
yeah.
She talks about like just the power in pausing, reflecting, and like sitting in it. That like that's where the power lies, is just sitting in it. And so I think we need to get better at sitting in the discomfort of potential differences and disparities. Usually it's the teacher's own
Yeah.
discomfort that percolates to the surface, and they don't know how to kind of navigate it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so what I'm hearing of all is essentially, if you're gonna do this, you need to be about that life, because there could be some tough stories or whatnot, and you can't be worried about your own comfort. That's not the goal as educators. Is for our to assess our level of comfort when we're learning from our students. I think definitely we can have compassion. I think definitely we can be empathetic. I guess for me, it's more of you need to be prepared that, like you said, there might be some difficult conversations that will ensue afterwards.
Yeah, and I think that this is like what we can end on. My kind of like last
Yeah.
message is a true like unapologetic reverence for all families. And so no matter what their stories are, even if they bring discomfort to us sometimes, or we feel that it's not how families should look like, sound like, or act like, the most important thing is an unapologetic kind of positive regard for the families in our midst and the stories and the trajectories that they bring, and a validation that they are contributing in worthy ways to their children's literacy lives, that every adult is a contributor to this child's kind of literacy growth as a more collective approach, as opposed to this top down, this is how schools do it, so that we're not separating schooled literacy from authentic literacy in the world, which includes, of course, oral storytelling.
Hey, well, good job. I like that, Naval. Good job on that. Thank you for your final thoughts. Again, Naval is the author of Nourishing Caregiver Collaborations, Elevating Home Experiences and Classroom Practices for Collective Care. If we have some folks that want to connect with you, what's the best way to reach you online?
You can reach me at NQC Literacy on Twitter/X and
Hey.
at Qarooni on Instagram. My website is also nqcliteracy.org.
And we'll leave all the links to the show notes, folks, in case that was hard to remember. All the links will be there. So thank you again, Naval. It has truly been a pleasure. I appreciate your time.
You're so awesome. Thank you for having me and for all the work that you do for education.
My pleasure.